Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring the Eventide role-playing game. This is a survival horror post-apocalypse RPG. If you haven't seen the other parts of my review, please check out the playlist in the description below. This is a role-playing game that you can play with your group, but you can also play it solo. This time we are going to talk about combat. Combat should still be story-driven and role-played in much the same way as the rest of the game. The rules are very loose to allow players to attempt pretty much anything they want to. On your turn, you simply describe narratively what you are doing, and then you do it. This rule set is quite old school. It is not so much about rules as it is about rulings, adjudicating the things that happen within the context, within a particular situation. You're going to be succeeding because of your creativity and intelligence and imagination as a player, rather than just depending on the stats of your player character. Here, you do not rely too much on gimmicks and special powers and abilities. It is about what you decide to do with the tools at your disposal and the environment. Combat in Eventide is extremely deadly. Players should be aware that simply running into a combat encounter, outnumbered or without a plan, can end very badly, very quickly. Combat in Eventide is divided into a series of combat rounds. Each round of combat represents approximately 5 seconds of time in the game world. During each round, each of the players and antagonists will get to take a single combat turn consisting of 2 actions. The order in which these characters take their turns each round is known as the initiative. All combat rounds in the game are divided into initiative roll and combat turns, that is, 2 phases. All players roll a combat test using just the combat stat at the start of every combat round. If the player gets at least 1 success, they act before all enemies. This is a good way to somewhat balance things considering the lethality. If they don't achieve any successes, they act after the enemies in this round. The exact order in which characters act before and after enemies can be decided by the players on a round-by-round basis. Each character and antagonist will get a combat turn every round, as long as they are able to act, that is, they are not incapacitated in some way. And this follows an initiative order. The players each take turns for their characters, and the Game Master takes turns for the antagonists in the combat. When it is a character or antagonist's turn, they are described as the active character. During a combat turn, the active character can perform up to 2 actions, which are move, attack, or interact. You cannot perform the same action twice in a single turn. The 2 actions that the active character selects can be performed in any order. Move covers pretty much everything related to you changing your position. Characters can move as far as is realistic within a 5-second turn. The Game Master may call for a maneuvering test if the character is attempting something quite difficult, for example, running and leaping across a chasm, perhaps moving through very difficult terrain, or perhaps a stealth test if the character is attempting to move unnoticed, but usually move actions do not trigger tests. When it comes to attack, to do this, you need to perform an attack action. You basically roll attack and apply damage. You select a target first, then you make your roll. If it's a melee attack, you roll combat plus melee. If it's a ranged weapon attack, you roll combat plus ranged attack. The test difficulty is equal to the defense of the opponent. If one player character is attacking another, they make an opposed roll. For the attack roll, the attacking player rolls combat plus the attack, melee or ranged, and the defender rolls their standard evade test, which is body plus maneuvering. Whoever rolls the most successes is the winner and accomplishes their task, successfully attacking or evading the attack. If the attack roll is successful, you apply damage. Now remember that in this role-playing game, the player is making almost all of the rolls. So that's why it works so well as a solo game. You are making the rolls for your character, both to attack and to avoid getting hit. When it comes to applying damage, on a successful attack roll, the Game Master subtracts the damage value of the weapon from the target's health points. Let's talk about interactions. If your character wants to do something besides attacking or moving during combat, this is called an interact action. So basically anything besides moving or attacking can be classified under this category. The Game Master could call for a test if the task is particularly taxing, and the narrative outcomes for failure would be interesting in terms of the story. Healing is an exception. It is considered an interact action, but it differs from other interact actions in that the character attempting the healing cannot make a move or attack action in that round. In short, if you are healing someone, that's all you can do this round. Now, when it comes to being attacked, the Game Master doesn't roll, as I mentioned earlier, to see whether an enemy attacking a player character is successful. Instead, the player rolls to see if their character manages to avoid the attack. This keeps the players in control of their character. Their successes and failures are their own. When a player character is being attacked by an enemy, they roll to see whether they are able to dodge the attack. This is known as an evade test. All enemies in the game have a combat skill value, and this is a representation of how proficient they are in combat, and how challenging it is to avoid their attacks. To make an evade test, you roll body plus maneuvering. The test difficulty is equal to the enemy's combat skill value. During combat, characters may move around their environment to get themselves into positions that provide cover or some sort of advantage, where they are hidden or concealed behind an object which obstructs the enemy's attack. If a character is in a position where they have either minor, partial, or heavy, that is nearly total cover, then they adjust the evade test dice pool to reflect this. So for example, if a character has minor cover, you add only one die to the evade test pool, and this goes up depending on your cover or your position. On a successful evade test, the character manages to get out of the way of the attack and takes no damage. If the evade test is unsuccessful, then the player character is hit and may take damage. So if your character gets hit, you need to make an armor test, subtracting the number of armor test successes from the incoming damage. The remaining damage, if any, is subtracted from the health clock. Armor has the potential to absorb incoming damage. Damage from environmental threats ignores armor. Armor values do not stack. So like I said, when a character is to take damage and they are wearing armor, they roll an armor test. The armor test is a roll using a dice pool equal to the armor value. This test is rolled like all other tests in the game. For every success in the armor test, the character takes one less damage. Armor values are determined based on the type of armor being worn. So heavy armor is going to provide more protection when compared to light armor or medium armor, but this could apply some penalties on some agility based tests. That is by following the realistic logic of this game. There is a hardcore variation where if at least one number 1 is rolled during the armor test, then you weaken the armor by one step. So heavy armor becomes medium, medium becomes light, and light armor breaks. Let's talk about the health clock. Each character has 12 health points in total. The amount of damage they take is tracked on the health clock on the character sheet. Depending on how much damage a character has taken, their health clock will either recover or decline, depending on how injured the character is. If your character has between 1 to 6 points of damage, then they will automatically recover 1 health point every hour, that is 1 segment every hour. If they have between 7 and 9 points of damage, they will lose an additional health point per hour. And if they have between 10 and 11 points of damage, they will lose an additional health point every minute. If a character's health clock is ever filled in completely, the character falls unconscious and is dying. The character then rolls 1d6. If they don't receive assistance within that many minutes, they perish and die. In summary, a character's health either automatically regenerates or deteriorates over time, depending on how much damage is taken. If the character ever takes 12 points of damage, they fall unconscious and will die very soon unless they receive medical attention. A character can make a healing test, that is survival plus healing, to try and heal some battle damage from an ally or themselves. To make a healing test, you must spend either a bandage or a first aid kit. If you have neither of these items, you cannot attempt a healing test. Bandages allow players to make a basic healing test, and first aid kits add additional successes to the roll. Once you have spent the item, you make the roll and apply the result. For each success in the healing test, you heal 1 damage from the target's health pool. If the healing player used a first aid kit and succeeds on the test, they recover 6 additional health points. The item being used, that is the bandage or first aid kit, is always spent in the attempt, even if the test is unsuccessful. Unlike other combat actions, the healing action takes up the entirety of that player's turn. They cannot move, attack, or perform any other action during this round. Now let's talk about weapons and damage. All weapons in Eventide have a damage value that is determined by the type of weapon it is. This is also useful for players and game masters who would like to create some of their own unique weapons which aren't included in the game already. These categories and their associated damage values are quite clearly explained. So for example, a light explosive does 6 points of damage, a heavy gun does 7 points of damage, a heavy melee weapon does 4 points of damage, and so on. There are some exceptions, but this chart, these values of weapons, allows you to introduce any weapon that you can think of that you have seen in comic books or movies or video games or whatever that fit into the post-apocalypse sort of experience. Now, concerning range, there are 3 ranges for weapons in the game. When a character attacks, the target of their attack must be within range of their chosen weapon. There is close range, medium range, and long range. Now, concerning environmental threats, there are many hazards in the world of Eventide that are not enemies or creatures that can harm the characters. These are known as environmental threats. The major difference between regular threats and environmental threats is that armor has no effect on the incoming damage from these environmental threats. Damage from environmental threats such as fire, cold, poison, gas, etc. is subtracted straight from the character's health points without any armor roll. In combat, there are also critical hits. If you achieve a critical success, that is 3 more successes than required, on your attack roll, you have made a critical hit. Critical hits represent amazing attacks that land on their target perfectly, hurting them even more than usual. Critical hits deal double the usual amount of damage to the target. Now, when it comes to conditions, when a character is successfully hit by an attack from an enemy with a condition associated with it, or some other particular situation occurs in the story, then the character gains the described condition. These conditions are usually temporary, listed in either a number of combat rounds or in-game world time, and will either resolve automatically over time or with some medical attention. Conditions do not stack. You cannot be, for example, double poisoned. Now let's talk about some of these conditions. When it comes to poisoned, when a character gets this condition, the character's health is steadily reduced over time. Poison usually only lasts for a short time, although some poisons may require antidotes to be eradicated. When a character is poisoned, they lose a number of health points every hour until the poison has worn off or they have taken an antidote. Incapacitated is about characters having been immobilized, either through a paralytic agent or by being pinned or trapped in place. When a character is incapacitated, they cannot perform move actions, but they can still attack and interact with objects within arm's reach. When it comes to unconscious, a character is essentially asleep or knocked out and cannot perform any actions. At the end of every combat round, the player makes a body test. If they achieve 2 successes, they wake up and can act again in the next round. After combat, the character wakes up. It is assumed that the party waits and helps them regain consciousness, unless stated otherwise. When it comes to dazed characters are considered disoriented and confused, and everything they attempt is especially difficult. They can still take actions during combat, but all test difficulty levels are doubled. When it comes to being blinded, the vision is severely impaired. Characters may still attempt tasks requiring vision, but the associated test difficulty level is tripled. I really like it how at the end of this combat section, they include a combat cheat sheet or flowchart, so you get a better understanding of how things proceed. And this concludes this part of the review. In the next part we are going to talk about vehicles. I really like how combat is handled in this role-playing game. Very old school, putting more emphasis on imagination, creativity, on the situation at hand. You're going to be putting emphasis on your gear, on your weapons, your equipment, rather than relying on special powers or abilities. I also like that style of combat, but I wouldn't like it for this particular game that feels grittier and somewhat more realistic. So you are really going to be exercising your brain as you try to outsmart your opponents in combat. Thank you for watching this part of the review, and thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending Drive-Thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.